Today is going to be a bit of story time, okay? We're going to read from two stories. The first story is going to be about, and I put it in quotes, a dead dog. And the second story is going to be about a scared boy. Now, I'm not making these stories up, okay? So I'm just sharing. They're not made up. But in all of that, the object is that we would understand identity, our identity, who we are, why we're here, and all these kinds of things. Okay, so identity or identity crisis. I'm not sure. Let's see how it fits, depending on how the message will go. Okay, so let's go to the first section. By definition, I know some of you are not here, some of you are here, but to define identity, many people define it as the uniqueness that is attributed to you based on your life's experiences and the things that you've done that make you who you are, which is good. And we feel like, okay, this definition is part of it, but it's not entirely everything. Okay, that there's a part of you that, or rather, your identity exists before the memories you make and the experiences you have. And so there's two definitions that I like to use. The first one is the personal identity. That identity encompasses the memories, experiences, relationships, and values that creates one's sense of self. This amalgamation creates a steady sense of who one is over time, and even as new facets are developed and incorporated into one's identity. I believe many people can resonate with that. Like, okay, your identity is the sum total of experiences, memories, relationships, connections that you've made over time, right? However, there is also a concept of identity which most people don't look at because it's beneath the surface. Okay, it's beneath what you're able to sometimes know just naturally, and this is it. Coming from the etymology of the word identity, it says that identity comes from the Latin word identitas, which means sameness. Okay, and it is derived from idem, which means the same. Okay, so it's interesting, when we say identity, we're talking about uniqueness, but the word itself comes from something that means similarity. It's a bit of like, what's happening there, right? And says, and the suffix tas, which indicates a state or condition. So the concept of identity thus originally referred to the quality of being the same or the condition of being identical to something or someone else. Okay, which is interesting, right? That, as we have discussed in the first session of identity, the gold standard, that as humans, we do not have intrinsic value, we have inherent intrinsic value, that we get our value, our sense of self-worth, not just from within ourselves, but that God backs us up, just as how currency in the gold standard is backed up by precious metals like gold, right? That as much as you are who you are, okay, the fact that there is a portion of you, a part of you, or the most integral part of you is created in the image and likeness of God, okay, that makes you valuable beyond whatever experiences that you've had, whatever disappointments that you've had. We understood that when it comes to identity, you don't change because your value is intact, okay? Not because of who you are, but because of the backing that you have in God. Are we together? And that's why we say that all lives are meaningful. There's no life that is worth less than another, okay? Because every life represents a certain expression of God that God deemed fit for them to exist. Do you understand? Okay? So I'm really like summarizing a lot of stuff, but we are there, right? So can we go to the next section, which is crisis in the context of identity. And it says, an identity crisis is a state of confusion, okay? Questioning and uncertainty about one's sense of self, purpose, and belonging. It's a feeling of disconnection from one's values, beliefs, and passions, leading to a search for a new sense of identity and meaning. Who can relate? Okay, okay, good. So many people experience this thing, the existential questions: who am I? Why am I on this earth? Questions of identity that sometimes can be hard to answer. And not only hard, they can be frustrating, okay? Because sometimes you find it so difficult to figure out who you are. Maybe you thought, okay, if I get that job, then I'll be content, and then it happens, and then you're like, that's not quite it. Maybe you're like, oh, maybe if I go on vacation, I come back. Maybe that's what I need. And you come back, yes, you're rested and you had a good time, but it still doesn't answer these questions. Or maybe you travel the world and it's a great experience, but you still come back with the same questions. I'm not saying these things are bad, but I'm just saying the question of identity cannot be answered outside. It can only be answered within, all right? Are we together? Okay? Identity is not achieved. It is revealed and received. You don't work to become who you are. You are who you are. Do you understand? Okay? So, this question of identity and the crisis that comes with figuring out who you are is something that bothers people a lot. Okay? And it causes people to do crazy things in the search for who they are. Okay? And so research shows that identity crisis can lead to anxiety, depression, mental health struggles, and such kind of things. Some of the things that we are going through in life, they are symptoms of a deeper problem. You understand? Maybe you're very unhappy about a particular situation. You're not pleased with the quality of the life that you're living. And sometimes you can blame it on a lot of things, okay? But the question, or rather the problem, can be that you just haven't figured out who you are. And so you're living a frustrated life, trying to get into, and now just psychologically, they divide it in different places. They say, okay, identity crisis when you're an adolescent, and then they have something like a quarter life crisis when you're, in your 30s or something, and then you have a midlife crisis. I don't know about what happens after. Maybe after your midlife crisis, then you just realize it doesn't matter. But the thing is, people go through these things, these motions, and they get frustrated. And people do crazy things when they hit these icebergs in life, And oftentimes, even in the madness of the things they're doing, still they don't find answers. That's a funny thing. So the solution to solving your identity crisis cannot be to, do mad things, right? It's an expression of frustration, but it's not the solution in itself. So identity crisis can come about as a result of many things. Life transitions, okay? Sometimes, maybe you move from one country to another. Maybe you've lost a partner, lost a parent, and, it can shake you a bit, and, it can make you ask some questions. Some traumatic events sometimes happen to us, and they shake our identity, especially when we haven't discovered who we are. Okay? Social media. Okay? Hallelujah. How many of us apparently that there's a lot of these comparisons that people do on social media, they really damage people's sense of self-worth, because you always assume that everyone has it better than you, and it really damages your concept and your sense of self. Also, internalize negative self-talk. Some people have I believe that everyone has an internal narrative. There's a story that you tell yourself about yourself. Okay, there's a way that you think, there's a conversation that you have with yourself. And sometimes people, maybe because of life or they don't know better, they have a negative internal narrative. Everything is just not fine, and you find yourself complaining a lot, find yourself not happy, you understand? And these things, they cumulatively, they affect who you are, and they make you feel like you don't know who you are. Do you understand? Because maybe this is not how you imagined life to be, okay? And sometimes we even end up feeling disconnected from people. We withdraw, we hide, okay? As we read last week in the story of creation, how when they tried to establish an identity outside of divinity, that they ended up feeling scared and afraid, and they ran away, right? Because your identity is not, like I said, it's not anywhere else. It's in the source. You understand? That's where your real identity is. So, I think we've touched on that. So let's go to the story, because I think we might spend some time discussing these stories, and I want us to be able to get as much from them as possible. I dare you to read the name. I dare you. It's a funny name. Yeah, I struggle. When you read it or when you hear it, it's fine. But when you try to write it, it becomes so difficult. You're like, Mephibo, Seth. Anyway, it's a character in the scriptures, and I think his life is very, very interesting, especially when looking at identity. Okay, we cannot go through the whole story, but if I should give you a background, he was the grandson of a king. Okay, so his father was the son of a king, and this king went through a midlife crisis. Okay, because this king, he felt insecure that someone else might take up his position. Okay? The king's name was Saul. And in that insecurity, he did a lot of crazy things. He tried to kill the person who he felt was a threat to his dynasty. Okay? And in that process, his son, who should have been the king after him, turned against his father and helped the person who the king was against. Okay? And this king was so full of pride and, of course, going through his own identity crisis. Instead of surrendering and allowing things to be as they were, he said, no, I'm going to kill myself because I don't feel like I can change things. And you know, even suicide and suicidal thoughts sometimes come from this place of identity, right? The fact that you don't know who you are and you don't know what to do with that question. And sometimes you feel like the best answer is to end it all. And so this guy, he did that. He fell on his sword and he died, okay? And yeah, eventually the kingdom was passed over to someone else. Now, that's the background. I'm going to read one verse here to tell you about who Mephibosheth, let's call him M. Oh, Murphy. Let's go with Murphy, okay? So it says, in verse 4, it says, Saul's son Jonathan had a son called Murphy, who was crippled as a child. Now, he was not born crippled. It's very important to understand. It tells us here that he was 5 years old when the report came from Jezreel that Saul, now this is the king who had gone through his own issues, and Jonathan, that's his father, had been killed in battle. And when the child's nurse, so you can see that he was born in some kind of royalty. It says, when the child's nurse heard the news, she picked him up and fled. It says, but as she hurried away, she dropped him. And he became crippled. Okay? So he wasn't born that way. Something happened. Someone dropped him. Someone let him down. And it affected him more than maybe he was prepared for. And you know, sometimes this is life. Some people who are given responsibility over you at certain points in your life may have dropped you. You know, not necessarily in a physical sense, but there are some disappointments and some things that happen to us that can deeply scar us, you know, especially from loved ones and people who are supposed to be having our back, you know, and they don't, or maybe they abscond their responsibility. And for one reason or another, we get affected by their actions. You understand? Clearly, it was not his fault. He was not part of the battle. He was a 5-year-old boy. And this happened to him. And he became crippled. Now, the meat of the story is 5 chapters later. Murphy is now grown, okay? He's mature. He's probably in his 30s or 40s. He has one child. And yeah, we're going to read. So one day, David asks, who's David? David is the king who took over after his grandfather. Okay? And he says, one day David asks, is anyone in Saul's family still alive? It's a good question to ask. Is anyone still alive? Because if there's no one alive, then he may not be able to fulfill his request. Okay? Anyone to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake. Now, this is very, very important because you understand the king's heart. He and Jonathan were the perfect definition of bromance. Okay? These guys were tight. You know, they really, really loved each other as brothers, even to the point of death. That Jonathan died at the expense, or Jonathan lost his life at the expense of David's kingship. Okay? He believed so much that David was the person for the job that he was willing to disappoint his father. Okay? So David felt some obligation to honor anyone who's connected to Jonathan in any way. So you can clearly see that from this story, David is not just looking to do good for any reason that concerns Mephibosheth. For any reason that concerns Murphy, okay, other than the fact that he is the son of his friend who died, called Jonathan. Okay? And he says here, he summoned a man named Ziba, who had been one of Saul's servants. So Ziba was a servant in Saul's kingdom. And so he called him and he says, "Are you Ziba?" The king asked. The man said, "Yes, I am. Yes, I am." And Ziba replied. The king then asked him, "Is anyone, again, still alive in Saul's family?" You see, I'm highlighting that word "still alive" because it's going to matter a lot as we explain this story. And he says, "If so, I want to show God's kindness to them." He felt like, man, my friend sacrificed so much for me. The least I can do is honor anyone who's connected to him. Okay? And he says, listen now, this is interesting. Yes. Ziba replied, "Yes, one of Jonathan's sons is still alive." But you see, he went ahead to add information that he wasn't asked, okay? But it's interesting that he said this, and he continued to say, he is crippled in both feet. Okay? Okay? Where is he? The king asked. He said, in Lo-Debar. Now, all these names have meanings, and I'll tell you what that means in a bit. Or I can even tell you now. Debar means thing or word, and law is a suffix that means no. Okay? So, if you combine it, it says that the king asked, where is he? And he says he's in Lo-Debar. He is in no thing, or he is nowhere. Like, his life is just, he's nowhere, he has nothing, he's just existing. Okay? He has no anchor for his life. He's just there. Okay? And he says, Ziba told him, at the home of Machir, son of Aniel. Okay, forget the names. Don't worry about the names. He says, so David sent for him and brought him from Machir's home. Listen, and his name was Mephibosheth. Yes. And he was Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. And he says, when he came to David, he bowed low to the ground in deep respect. And David said, greetings, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth replied, I am your servant. Okay, so bowing to royalty, showing respect, all of that. And now David speaks. He says, don't be afraid. Okay? He has reason to be afraid, right? Because his family was against. But David reassures him that there's nothing to be afraid of. You can relax. I'm not calling you to kill you. I'm not calling to finish off your lineage. No, I'm here to show God's kindness to you. And David said, I intend to show kindness to you because of my promise to your father. Now that's very, very interesting. Why is David being kind to Mephibosheth? Is it because of Mephibosheth's lifestyle? Is it because he's a good person? Is it because he contributes meaningfully to the community? Is it because he helps the poor? Why is he showing kindness to Mephibosheth? I'm asking you a question. If you He made a promise. So who is this about? Right? Yeah, Jonathan, right? Saul's father. It's about Jonathan. Okay? It has really nothing to do with Mephibosheth, but he gets to be the what? The beneficiary. Do you understand this concept? So David is overlooking everything that's wrong with him and everything that he feels is not right in his life. And he's saying, hey, this is not about you. I know you are going to receive the benefit, but this is bigger than you. I gave my word to your father. and I have to fulfill it. Okay? And it says here, I intend to show kindness to you because of the promise I made to your father Jonathan. He says, and I will give you all the property that once belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will eat here with me at the king's table. Look at that, that in one day, someone's life changed so much because he was in nothingness, he was in Lodebar, and he was summoned before the king, not to be killed, but to receive benefits and restoration for everything that not just he had lost, but his family had lost. And somehow this unlikely character becomes a beneficiary, direct beneficiary of the king, even enough to sit at the king's table. Okay? Right? So he was not a man of honor. He was not a nobleman. He was not someone who was even worthy to be there, but because of a word, or because of the word that was given to his father, then he gets to enjoy these benefits. But the interesting thing is not even the things that David says, it's what Mephibosheth says about himself that is really the meat of the story. Now in verse 8, Mephibosheth bowed respectfully and exclaimed, I don't know if you can see. He says, who is your servant that you should show so much kindness to a dead dog like me? Do you see? He had a certain mindset and mentality about who he was. He had a certain understanding and an appreciation or lack thereof of his value, of his purpose on this earth, to the point that he viewed himself as a dead dog. Do you understand? He was not being humble. This is what he truly thought and felt of himself. And really, we can't blame him. He had been through so much. You see, he had been born in a wealthy family, and probably for the first 5 years of his life, he expected that this was how life would go. But somewhere along the way, someone dropped him and he became crippled, and his father died, and his grandfather died, and their kingdom was taken away from them. And now he becomes something that he never even imagined. And in that state, because his identity maybe was connected to all the things that were around him, as he grew up, he lost that sense of self. He had no reason to live anymore. He felt like there was no point in me being alive. He says, I am like a dead dog. And I can probably predict that he was the kind of person who was so negative. He was so hopeless that there was nothing that could change him. Even in the presence of the king, he has the audacity to, and this is quite funny, make it about himself. That the king said, I'm doing this for your father. And he says, why are you showing me such kindness? Why are you showing such kindness to a dead dog like? But was David really doing it to him? No. It was beyond him. But you see, his identity crisis had consumed so much. It had robbed him of so much of himself that there was nothing left for him to give. And so even when an opportunity is presented before him, not because of him, he still does not feel he is worthy. And that's interesting. He suffered from shame and guilt. Okay? Shame and guilt because maybe he felt like, I was part of the royal family, and maybe for some reason, sometimes I notice kids blame themselves a lot for what their parents do. I don't know if you've seen that. They may not be the cause, but they can say, oh, my mom and dad separated because of me. Have you ever had this kind of conversation? Right? But is it really them? No. But they can believe it. And they can always feel and carry that feeling that they are the problem everywhere that they go. Okay? So life circumstances can push us to places where we stop understanding who we are because things have happened to us. People have dropped us. You understand? Things have happened. Our legs, our ability to do things, or our inability thereof to do things, have taken away our sense of self-worth, and we feel like we're meaningless. We feel like we deserve nothing good. And so we expect nothing good, and we resign to life, and we just let things happen to us. Do you understand? We don't take charge anymore because we don't believe there is. You see, it's interesting. It would be interesting if he said, I'm like a dog. You know, he could have stopped there. But why did he need to say, I'm like a dead dog? Do you understand? At least a dog can be adopted. But you cannot do anything with a dead dog. His sense of self had gone to a point where, listen, he was as good as dead. Do you understand? He didn't feel like he was useful at all. He didn't feel like he mattered. And sometimes this identity crisis thing can push you to that ledge where you don't feel like you matter. Okay? And so, and it's funny because even the servant, okay, in asking, where is Saul's grandson? He said he's still alive, okay? But he said he is crippled. Now sometimes people, because of how you see yourself, people also attach the same narrative to you. Do you understand? How do you expect people to talk highly of you or to respect you when you don't respect yourself? Do you understand? When you don't value yourself, wouldn't it be unfair to expect others to value you? Do you understand? Do you understand what I'm saying? So he had lived his life in this mindset that he's worth nothing, that he's worthless. And you see, sometimes this is the battle that we have. Circumstances are there. But if you allow the thought to come into your mind that because of these circumstances, your value, your worth, your identity is diminished, now that becomes a problem. People will go through things. Things will happen to you. But listen, your identity does not change because someone dropped you. Do you understand? Your identity does not change because you made a mistake. Your identity does not change because someone called you a name. Your identity does not change because someone bullied you. Your identity does not change because someone scammed you or because someone broke your heart. No. And you see, the danger is if you allow this to happen, it's a slippery slope where every experience, every negative experience that you have will chip away at who you are until there's nothing left. Until there's only a dead dog. Maybe he started off life as the son of a king. Then he went to being a cripple. Then he went to being a dog. Then finally he ended up as a dead dog. And so his story is powerful in learning that we have to. It's not a suggestion, but it's a requirement that you must hold your identity at its source. Rather, you must hold your identity to the same standard that it was given to you at birth. What I mean is, when God created you in his image and likeness, your identity can never be affected unless you allow it by the things that come at you and the things that happen to you. He was still who he was, but he allowed these experiences to define him otherwise. Are we together up to there? Yes. Okay? Are we good? Yes. So let's go to the next story. I don't know if you can see. It's so bright. Eh? No, back. You can switch off the lights? Aha. The names are there, and I'm sure none of us know what this is because none of us existed over 100 years ago. But what you see on your left is a what? And what's here is a? Okay. What are some distinctions that you see in this picture? Just obvious. It's not a trick question. Nothing. Huh? Holes. Okay. Anyone else? Depth, okay. Anything else? I mean, yeah, the threshing floor is more open, right? You can probably, where would you choose to hide? Okay, great. But what's this for? Do you know? For grain, right? For threshing grain, right? So you, like, if you're harvesting grain, barley, wheat, you hit it there, and like the grains which are heavier than the chaff will stay at the bottom, and when the wind blows, it carries the grain away. I don't know how this works, but it works somehow, right? There's holes. But there's a difference, right? This, you cannot have a threshing floor in an enclosed place because it works by employing the advantages of the wind, okay? I'll tell you why I'm telling you this story. Let's go to the next story about my good friend called Gideon. Oh, we should have switched off the lights the whole time. No, will it affect the quality? Yeah. Okay, that's great, no problem. So, backstory again. A guy called Gideon. Okay? What's Gideon's story? Where do I start? So it's like this. The Israelites were in bondage in Egypt for a couple of years. Moses took them out. For 40 years, he led them out of Egypt into some other land. Okay. Moses died. Joshua took over. He continued to lead them and guide them. Joshua died. When Joshua died, there came a series of leaders called judges. Okay? Judges. And Gideon was one of the judges. Okay? So this is a story of how he was called. But the reason why we're reading out this story in connection to identity is because Gideon too had a problem understanding who he was. And it's important to read and see what his struggle was. See if you resonate with it and see the solutions that are provided here. Okay? So I'll begin here from verse 11, but you can go and read from verse 1 if you want in your own time. And it says, one day the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak of Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, whose son Gideon, listen, was threshing wheat in the threshing floor. Does it say threshing floor? He's threshing wheat in the... Is that weird? That's strange, right? You should be threshing wheat in the threshing floor. Why are you threshing wheat in the wine press? Who wants to take a guess? Huh? Okay. So the answer is just here. It says he was threshing wheat in the wine press out of the sight of the Midianites. Meaning that he was what? He was hiding. He was afraid because as you see how the wine press is, it's below the surface of the earth to some extent that you can do your activities, but while you are hidden. Okay? But what does that tell you about Gideon? What is he feeling in doing this? Fear. Right? Because you only hide when you're afraid. And so we already begin to see that some telltale signs of an identity crisis. Sometimes we are afraid of things that we should not be afraid of. Because he should not be afraid of threshing wheat openly, unapologetically. But now he has to do it hidden, away from the eyes of the Midianites. But also another interesting thing about the wine press is that it's below the surface of the earth. So that means or expresses a sense of, a subpar, below the standard that he should be operating. He is working or living at a lower level. Do you understand what I'm saying? Metaphorically, of course, right? That he should be on ground level, but he is below ground level, hiding from something or someone. And the story behind Gideon's call is this, that there came a time when his tribe was being attacked by these people called the Midianites. And they would come, and anytime they harvest, they would steal their harvest. Anytime they make any kind of progress, these guys would come and take it away. So we could say he was justified in doing this, okay? But the truth is he was not living his best life. He was living subpar, okay? So it says this, Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress out of the sight of the Midianites. And he says the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, now remember, this is a fearful boy hiding and tucking away in places where he cannot be seen. But notice what God says to him, because what God says to him is what God says to you in any situation. It doesn't matter what you are experiencing, God will never call you what you are not. You understand? You might be feeling fearful, but he will never label you as a fearful person. You may be feeling inadequate, but he will never label you as an inadequate person. So even in that fear that the Lord could see, he called Gideon and he says, Gideon, says, God is with you, O mighty warrior. And I find that interesting, that this boy who is so afraid, shaken up, has an encounter and an experience while he's threshing wheat. And instead of God acknowledging what he's feeling, he's calling him something that feels a bit out of his realm. You know? It's like I meet you crying and say, oh, you're such a happy lady. You probably call me what? Insensitive. Right? But the truth is, no. There's a difference between what you feel and who you are. And if what you feel is who you are, you're in trouble. Because your identity will always be shaky and unstable. So Gideon was feeling fear. But in the experience he had with God, God did not acknowledge the fear, not in ignoring it, but in actually telling him who he is. And he says, Gideon, God is with you, O mighty warrior. Or O mighty man of valor, as it says in other renderings. And so he goes on to say, Gideon replied, with me? Saying God is with me? Because sometimes you look at your life and you're like, where is the evidence? You know, there's so much brokenness, so much hurt, so much fear, so much disappointment. It's not possible. Or that statement does not seem true when you tell me God is with me. Can you understand what I'm saying, someone? Right? That when you go through things, you feel like, how can you say God is with me? How can you say that I have divine assistance, yet all these things are going wrong and nothing seems to be making sense? So this was Gideon. Gideon replied, with me, my master. And he said, if God is with us, listen to the questions that he asks. Why has all this happened to us? Okay? Questions that people ask, if God is there, why is there so much evil in the world? Why does bad things happen to good people? Are these questions familiar? Not just out there, but even in here, sometimes things happen to us. And we look at it and we say, the fact that this has happened, I cannot believe in the goodness of God toward me. So this is Gideon. If God is with us, why has all this happened to us? And he asks, where are all the miracle wonders that our parents and grandparents told us about? Telling us, told us about, telling us, didn't God deliver us from Egypt? So he's telling God in this conversation, I heard of great things that our parents told us, but I see no evidence of it right now. I see no proof of it. And he said, the fact is God has nothing to do with us. And you know, sometimes we feel like that. We feel abandoned and we feel like, really, whether you believe in God or whether you don't believe, at some point you feel like, no, even if there was a God, he's truly maybe has abandoned me. Because things have happened, okay? So this is Gideon. And he says, the fact is, God has nothing to do with us. And he has turned us over to Midian. He felt that way. Why do these people keep attacking us? God must have given up on us. He has nothing to do with us. That's the frustration. And you see, it's interesting. Even in this, the angel does not change his confession about who Gideon was. Still, even in his complaining, it does not affect God's view of who you are. Do you know that? Even if you see yourself as a dead dog, God does not change his mind about you. Even if you see yourself as wretched and hopeless, God's mind about you is steady. He sees you as the apple of his eye, as his beloved son and daughter. Okay? Because his understanding of you is not based on what you're going through and what you're feeling. It's based on who he is and the promise that he gave. It's based on his word. Just as David's commitment to help Mephibosheth was based on the word that he gave to Jonathan. And so it's here, but God faced him directly and he said, listen, it's like, it's funny. It's like all these things that he said didn't mean anything. Because in the next statement, he says, go in this strength that is yours. What strength? What are you talking about? Like I'm threshing wheat in the wine press. What strength? And sometimes that's us. Someone tells you, oh, you've got it. You're doing good. And you're like, what are you talking about? I'm barely making it. And you're telling me that I have enough to even do more. And sometimes in these kinds of situations, we hear people saying things like, no, I can't be the one to solve that problem. I cannot be the one. I don't have enough strength. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough confidence. Let someone else do it. That's for someone else to do. I have enough problems of my own. You understand? Give it to someone else who's more capable. Have you ever felt that way? Right? Especially concerning your dreams and some dreams that you had growing up. And one by one, as life happens, you give up this one and you give up the next one and you give up the next one until at the end of it, there is nothing left. Because you keep assuming that, someone else will do it. You disqualify yourself at every loss. You disqualify yourself at every mistake. You disqualify yourself at every disappointment. This was Gideon. But it's funny, even in his attempt to complain, he says, I like it. He said, God faced him directly and said, go in this strength that is yours. That even when you feel like you don't have strength, even when you feel like you don't have anything going for you, the way God looks at it is, you have strength. You have it in you. You have what it takes. It's not for someone else to do. Do you understand? And he says, save Israel. I know people are like, this is a long time ago. Save Israel. Haven't I just sent you? Do you understand? And so Gideon said to him again, my master, how and with what could I ever save Israel? Sometimes you look at what you want and you just see you don't have the resources. You don't have the capability. You feel like you are really, really inadequate. And this was Gideon's problem. He says, how and with what could I ever save Israel? He says, look at me. I am my clan's weakest. No, he said, look at me, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh. So he looked at his condition. He said, okay, even if you were to choose people, I come from the most disadvantaged. I come from the smallest. But not only that, I am the runt of the litter. Do you know what the runt of the litter is? When puppies are born, okay? When puppies are born, there's usually one puppy that's like malnutritioned. It usually dies because it has some birth defects and stuff like that. So that's what he's saying about himself. He said, I come from the smallest of situations, and even in that, I am the worst of them. Showing that he had no hope. He too did not have the right identity or the right perspective of who he truly was. He looked at his life, he looked at circumstances, and he felt like, no, like, there cannot be anything good that will come out of my life. And he resigned to that fact, as many people have. He gave up. He said, you know what? I'm the weakest, I'm the smallest. There's nothing more to me. But this is the beauty about God. Even when you talk yourself down to that level, he doesn't agree with you when you're wrong. He still holds his perspective of you. Like he called him, O Gideon, mighty man or mighty warrior. And God said to him in verse 16, he says, I'll be with you. Believe me, you will defeat the Midian. Details. As one man. Speaking even more to the fact that, no, I'm not telling you you're going to do it together with your friends. That's good, but I'm telling you, you who feels like there is nothing left in you to go, you who feels burnt out, he's saying you're going to rise up and you're going to do it alone. And he says, I will be with you. Because he knows how he made you. He knows in whose image and likeness you are created. You understand? If your identity is after God, then you cannot be defeated by nature. You understand? And so even though you feel down, even though you feel lost, even though you feel misplaced, listen, your feelings are not your identity. You are a mighty man. You are a mighty woman. Your experiences, they don't define you. Your true worth comes from God himself. You understand? So we are not dead dogs and we are not the runt of the litter. We are mighty men and we are mighty women as helped by God. And everything you desire in this life, if you can believe, he says you will conquer as one man, as one woman. Do you understand? You and God against the world, and you will win. All right? Let's conclude. It says in Ephesians 2:10, for we are God's masterpiece. Who knows what a masterpiece is?
Best work.
Yeah. Who has a masterpiece? Giovanni, do you have a masterpiece? Mm-hmm. Do you have a masterpiece?
Several.
Oh, several. Okay. Do you feel the same towards them?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Oh, thank God you said that. So it's possible to have many masterpieces and have the same feeling towards all of them. Who else has a masterpiece? Who's an artist here? Of any kind? Hey. Oh my God. Listen. You may not feel talented, but listen, you are. You are talented. That's your identity. Do you understand? Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You're you're gifted. You understand? Some people say, I have no gifts, I have no talent, I have no skills. No, it's not true. It's somewhere in there. Okay? So it says this, for we are God's masterpiece. He says he has created us anew in Christ. He says, so we can do good things he planned for us long ago. We are God's masterpiece. That is your identity. You're not a dead dog. You're not the runt of the litter. You're not weird. You're not awkward. You're not strange. You're not feisty. You're not rude. You are a masterpiece. And so it says here that 1 John 3:1, it says, consider the kind of extravagant love the Father has lavished on us. He called us children of God. And he says, it is true. We are his beloved children. And he says, and in the same way the world did not recognize him, the world does not recognize us either. To mean that your identity, if your identity comes from the confirmation that you get from others, oh, you're in trouble. Your identity comes from within. It does not come from the recognition that you receive from your friends and your peers. You understand what I'm saying? Because they can change. They can call you names, but that's not your identity. You understand? So they may not recognize who you are, just as Ziba called Mephibosheth a crippled, but God knows who you are, and you ought to know who you are as well. And he continues to say, when we feel like we're not good enough to be loved by God, he says we should remember that God's love is greater than our doubts. Like Mephibosheth was standing before the king, and he says, "Who am I for you to show kindness to this dead dog?" He forgot that the love that David had for Jonathan is greater than that situation that he was in. Similarly, the love that God has for you is bigger than any self-doubt, any inadequacy, any incompetency that you may be feeling at any given moment. His love for you is consistent. And he says there that when we feel like we're not good enough to be loved by God, we should remember. We shouldn't go out and cut our hair and insult people and quit our job and do all sorts of things to express our frustration. What you need to do is to remember. Remember that he loves you. Remember that he created you in his image and likeness. If you can remember, your identity will be secure. It will be intact. You will not have to go through these things that, as we read there, 75% of the world goes through an identity crisis. You'll be part of the 25%, hopefully. When you remember, think about when you're going through things that are so hard to understand. Don't give in to the thought that, oh, this is the end of me, or I don't know how I'm going to make it. Just remember, oh, what extravagant love that he's lavished upon us. And he says here that we must silence the sounds of condemnation so we can hear the voice of God's loving assurance. Do you know, you cannot hear, if you get in that state of self-condemnation, it's very difficult for you to believe that God loves you, because you're allowing another voice to speak to you. You're allowing another voice to define you, to call you a dead dog, to call you the runt of the litter, to call you all the negative things. That internal narrative must change and must be aligned to what God says about you. Do you understand? It must change. You cannot keep calling yourself names. You cannot keep addressing yourself like someone you're not. You cannot keep calling yourself stupid. You cannot keep calling yourself dumb. Because that's not who you are. But as you say it, you believe it. Do you understand? And don't give people the right to label you things that you're not. Do you understand? Don't give people that authority to call you what you are not. Don't give anyone that privilege. That privilege is the reserve of God and you alone. That you stand before the mirror and you say, I'm loved, I'm beautiful, I'm healthy, I'm well. Do you understand? And so he says here that we must silence the sounds of condemnation so we can hear the voice of God's loving assurance and remember that he has selected us to be part of the family. Wow. And so in conclusion, how much time do we have? I feel like I was on time today. No, oh, man. Okay, quick. This is the last one. It says, for the Holy Spirit makes God's fatherhood real. He says he whispers to us in our inmost being. What does he whisper? He says, you're God's beloved child. That's the voice you want speaking to you. Not, nothing good is ever going to come out of me. I'm going to end up like my father or my mother. Random example, right? Like, your mother and father may be good. That's good. You want to end up like them. But I'm just saying you get it, right? It says, the voice says that you are my beloved child. He says it makes God's fatherhood real, because sometimes for many people it's not real. We don't understand that concept. Okay? And he says, and since we are his true children, he says, we qualify to share all his treasures, for indeed we are heirs of God himself. And he says, since we are joined to Christ, we also inherit all that he is. All that he is. Not just all that he has, but all that he is. You inherit everything that is Christ. And it also adds, and all that he has. You understand? His nature, his mindset, the mind of Christ, his perspective, his faith, his hope, his love. You inherit all of that. And he says here, we will experience being co-glorified with him, provided that we accept the sufferings as our own. What sufferings? Sufferings that sometimes in identifying yourself with Jesus, or you will receive a lot of flack. Yeah. Okay? And he says in 18, he says, I am convinced that any suffering we endure, I love this, is less than nothing. What's less than nothing? What's less than nothing? So it says there is no experience you can have. Nothing, it doesn't matter who drops you and how hard. He says, I'm convinced that any suffering we endure is less than nothing compared to the magnitude of glory that is about to be unveiled or manifested within us. Now, he's not saying that you didn't go through things, but he says when you compare what you went through versus the glory of God within you, he says this one pales into insignificance. But if this becomes your focus, if the dropping, the disappointment, and the mistakes become your focus, then your life will follow the same path. But if the glory, the beauty, the majesty of Christ revealed in you becomes your focus, then the same will follow in your life. And so he says that I am convinced that any suffering we endure is less than nothing compared to the magnitude of glory that is about to be unveiled within us. And he says, oh, I love this part. He says the entire universe is standing on tiptoe. It's eager. It's waiting. The world is waiting for you. The world is eager. It's excited to see what becomes of you when you realize who you really are. When you come out of the wine press, when you live life as you ought to be, when you shake off the disappointments and the mistakes, and when you allow yourself to be your true self, who is made in the image and likeness of God, he says the entire universe is standing on tiptoe. It's eager. The world is waiting to see, and he says yearning to see the unveiling of God's glorious sons and daughters. Wow. It's not for the next person to do it. No. That situation is waiting for you to rise up to the occasion. That challenge is waiting for you to rise up to the occasion. The answer is in here, not out there. You have what it takes. You understand? Not motivational speech. Scripture. You understand? Because it's true. But so many people live below their potential. They live below their identity. They live imposter lives. They live as dead dogs and as the runt of the litter, whereas they were called to sit at the king's table and to conquer as one man. Guys, I'm done. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.